Well, good morning. Welcome. My name is Matt Whitinger. I'm a resident fellow in poverty studies here at AEI. This morning we are exploring an important and underappreciated area of social policy and efforts to help families thrive, the role of marriage and healthy relationships. Let me start by thanking Ryan Streeter, AEI's Director of Domestic Policy Studies, along with Brent Arell, who's here with us, a resident fellow in poverty studies here at AEI, for assembling the research team and coordinating the development of the report we're discussing today. This is a great example of how AEI is seeking to integrate knowledge across domains to achieve better outcomes for families, especially low-income families with children who have the very most to gain. 2 generations after the sexual revolution, whether parents marry remains a key factor behind why many families with children thrive and others can struggle. Overall, children in married households are the least likely to be in poverty, at around 8%. Meanwhile, children in single-father households have double that rate of poverty, 19%. Children in single-mother households have poverty rates almost 5 times as high, 41%. Government benefits not counted in official poverty statistics narrow those gaps, but do not close those gaps. And research by sociologists and economists like Raj Chetty has confirmed that being raised in a stable 2-parent household is one of the greatest predictors of upward mobility and positive outcomes in adulthood. Studies also suggest married adults are happier and physically healthier. As my colleague Brad Wilcox has noted, marriage has a transformative effect on adult behavior, emotional health, and financial well-being, especially for men. Men who get married work harder and earn more money. They go to bars less and church more and live longer. Yet today, marriage is in retreat, with fewer people getting married and a widening marriage gap separating college grads from others, contributing to inequality and a host of other concerns. Owing to the centrality of marriage and healthy relationships to family and child well-being, since 2006, HHS has overseen a $150 million initiative to conduct healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood promotion activities. Of that amount, $75 million each year is designated for healthy marriage and relationship education. Today's session is about answering a seemingly simple question. Are those programs working, especially for lower-income individuals and couples? The answer is more complicated than most reviews to date suggest. Recent reviews are typified by a National Academy of Sciences report suggesting healthy marriage programs have failed. It describes this effort as, quote, an ambitious attempt by the federal government to develop programs that would improve couple relationship skills, promote marriage, and improve child well-being. But it concluded it failed to achieve its goals. Thankfully, Dr. Alan Hawkins has conducted a careful review of the evaluation research and found a more nuanced and positive answer. A copy of his report is on the tables and available online at the AEI website, and Dr. Hawkins will review his answer and his research in a few minutes. After that, we're honored to be joined by Lynn Johnson, the Assistant Secretary at HHS's Administration for Children and Families, who will provide her reactions. And then finally, AEI's Brad Wilcox will lead a panel discussion featuring an all-star cast of experts in this field. Brad is a visiting scholar here at AEI, as well as an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Virginia, where he directs the National Marriage Project. He's also the author of When Marriage Disappears, The Retreat from Marriage in Middle America. Brad will be joined by Ellen and Lynn, along with Dr. Wade Horn, whose birthday it is today. Happy birthday, Wade, who President George W. Bush famously dubbed the marriage czar while he was Assistant Secretary at ACF. Rounding out the panel is Mary Myrick, the CEO of Public Strategies, a 3-time recipient of Healthy Marriage Grants based in Oklahoma City. I thank everyone for joining us here for this important discussion. And with that, I'll formally introduce Alan and Lynn. Dr. Alan J. Hawkins is the past chair of the Utah Marriage Commission and the Camilla E. Kimball Professor of Family Life at Brigham Young University. He earned a PhD in Human Development and Family Studies at the Pennsylvania State University in 1990. He's taught and conducted research and outreach at Brigham Young University since then. His scholarship and outreach focuses on educational and policy interventions to help couples form and sustain healthy relationships and enduring marriages. In 2003 and 2004, he was a visiting scholar with the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation at ACF, working on the Federal Healthy Marriage Initiative. Lynn Johnson is the current Assistant Secretary at HHS's Administration for Children and Families, the agency that oversees the Healthy Marriage and Relationship Education Program, along with other major public assistance programs. Before joining the Trump administration, Mrs. Johnson served as the Executive Director of Jefferson County Human Services in Colorado, overseeing the county's Head Start program, as well as programs on workforce, career, family services, child welfare, justice services, and community assistance. Mrs. Johnson previously ran her own consulting firm, which dealt with mental health, high-risk youth, developmental disabilities, child welfare, and early childhood education. And she was the chief of staff to Colorado Lieutenant Governor Jane Norton in 2003, and from 1999 to 2002 was a policy advisor to Colorado Governor Bill Owens. Again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you especially to our panelists for being here. Dr. Hawkins, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Matt. And I actually want to begin by thanking the American Enterprise Institute for their interest in this kind of below-the-radar policy initiative that is going on, that has been going on for almost the past 15 years. And maybe I'm over-interpreting that interest, but to me it means that ACF believes that the family itself has a role to play as we address this issue of poverty, that it's not just derivative of the other social institutions and social forces out there, but it is an institution and a force in and of itself and deserves direct attention as we try to figure out what we can do to strengthen families in ways that can increase the well-being of children and adults in our society. So maybe I'm over-interpreting that, but that's how I come at this issue. And I'm grateful for AEI's attention to this and for their invitation to me kind of pull together what we know about this policy initiative that I've been looking at closely now since the early 2000s, so now for more than 15 years. And I think there's some things that we can learn, though we are still on that learning curve, and there is still more to come that way. Just an audio-visual thing. The slides are not showing on the screen down here. If that can be corrected, that's a little bit easier for me to see, but we'll move forward. So first of all, I think we can't assume that everyone out there knows what this Healthy Marriage and Relationship Education Initiative is about. By the way, its name has changed a number of times over the years. And I think I'll be referring to it mostly by its current appellation, which I think they call it the Healthy Marriage and Relationship Education Initiative, HMRE. It's a new account in this portfolio of public policy issues trying to help and strengthen families and reduce poverty. And it began about 20 years ago. There was a lot of rumblings about this, but I think it got a major boost when the Bush administration, nearly 20 years ago now, gave it some real thought and brought in Wade Horn as Assistant Secretary for Children and Families, who brought this idea that the government ought to think about direct ways to strengthen families, including the institution of marriage, or the M word, as it is most commonly referred to these days. So Wade put in motion a process that's still going on these days, which is to provide grants to community organizations that would provide educational interventions and services to support more disadvantaged, lower income individuals and couples who wanted to strengthen their relationships, their marriages, with an ultimate hope that this would create better, more stable families, better parenting, better outcomes for children. So that's what the initiative is and has been going now. I think we're in the 14th year of major federal funding for these community organizations to run these kinds of programs. So the question then, is it working? And I think the answer to that, it depends on who you ask. Richard Reeves, a very important voice at the Brookings Institution, took a look at this recently and concluded that no, he didn't think it's working. His Bush-inspired policies to promote marriages have had little success, was his conclusion. And if you will, even a more prestigious voice, if you would, from the National Academy of Sciences, addressing a critical question about how do we put a dent in child poverty in this society. I appreciate that they looked at this issue, that this policy initiative got some attention, but again, their conclusion was that it's not having an impact. And maybe it was those voices then that got AEI's attention and said, we want to look a little bit more closely at it. I think, however, that the answers we've heard a lot of out there are such that first of all, they've been too fast, too quick. This is not microwavable stuff here. This takes a lot of time to bake in the oven. Good policy takes time to get it right and to get the impact. And I think they were making judgments based on the earliest research. And at that, not as careful a look at it as it should be. I also think that they were looking at too thin of a body of work in this area, looking only at one or two studies rather than the full range of work that's been done. And that helps nuance that answer. And then finally, I think we do have to admit that we all come to these kinds of things with our own biases. And those biases, I think, were such that there was sort of automatically a sort of dark cloud out there that was not expecting this to work, not expecting to see positive effects, and indeed ideologically really quite concerned about this initiative, that it's the wrong way to go. So as a result, I think those early conclusions were not very effective, were not accurate. My reading of this over the past 15 years creates a more nuanced, mixed, but I think a more hopeful and a more positive conclusion for what's going on. All right. The first thing we probably ought to do as we talk about, first of all, is are these educational programs and services that are trying to help lower income couples strengthen their relationships, are they getting out there? Are they reaching? That was certainly a question that was there in the beginning. Would there be any interest? And would policy be able to get to them? And by my estimate, and these are my calculations, maybe Lynn has something even more precise, I don't know. But my calculations put it at now at well over 2 million individuals reached by these services. And by that, I'm not saying that just touched. I mean, these are people that actually participated in full-fledged programs and got a significant dose. About 187,000 people a year. And so, depending on which lens you put on, that's a drop in the bucket in terms of all that are needed, but it certainly is a very important number in showing that we can get reach to these individuals. I also put that up against the total expenditures from the federal policy initiative and come up with a figure of about $400 per participant, which is, I don't know. I don't know enough about all of the different kinds of social policy programs out there to know how we rank. But my guess is that that ranks pretty good in terms of efficiency, reaching these couples. And again, going after from my own data, are we getting to the right target? That was also a real question. This kind of work had not been done with more disadvantaged groups in the past. Would there be interest? Yes, but who would be interested? And my data show that we've got nearly 90% of those who are participating are disadvantaged. There's only about a third are white, and it is about half and half female and male. And there was concern about that. Yeah, maybe the women would be interested, but would the men come? And I think we've got a good answer to that as well. We also know, excuse me, that a significant proportion of those couples who are distressed want this and come to these programs. And so I think we're reaching a motivated group as well that wants to work on their relationship. And we note that even in some instances, there's evidence even that there's been some kind of relationship violence in the past year, though my data don't specify whether that was from a former relationship or the current relationship. So these are relationships where I think that some help is needed. All right, do they like the programs when they come? And I think there's been some good implementation studies done that show high levels of satisfaction with the programs that they are receiving. Even critics of this initiative who have very different perspectives about the value of what's being done have noted that there is nearly universal appreciation for the services that they've received. So overall, I do think that these programs that have been delivered through community-based organizations, they are reaching non-trivial numbers of distressed, diverse, lower-income individuals and couples, and doing so at a moderate per participant cost. So the next question then, in my mind, becomes, is it working? So what have we learned? We've had a handful now of rigorous federal evaluations through the Office of through OPRE. Sometimes you forget what it all stands for. We've also had a number of other studies that have been done, some of them with ACF-funded programs, but many of them have been done independently of that as well. And so I've tried to pull that together and answer this question, are they working? The three major studies that have been done through the Administration for Children and Families, Building Strong Families, Supporting Healthy Marriage, and the Parent and Children Together studies. Now, I review those in detail in the report. I'm just going to do a really basic summary of them here and what I think we've learned. There's one more that should be coming. I think it's out in 2021 is when it should be out. Let me just sort of pause here and again thank ACF for its continuing attention to this issue and its long-term commitment to understand what we are accomplishing with this initiative. Okay, let's talk about some of these multi-site randomized control trials, these very gold standard rigorous studies that have been going on. The first one out of the chute was termed Building Strong Families. that the Mathematica Policy Research Organization helped ACF conduct. And this involved thousands of lower income unmarried couples, and which was a key target early on in this work. Can we help those couples who have children together and have desires and hopes for stable families to achieve that? So this was the first thing where we started this long learning curve that we're on about how this might work. Ultimately, those findings, I think I would point them out as disappointing, not incredibly surprising given the challenge that they were facing and doing this work just right at the very beginning of the initiative rather than building up a little bit more experience and so that we might know better what to do. But this study showed no impacts. Now, there are some qualifications to that, some nuances to that I have in the report. But the problem with this, the major problem with this study was there were very low participation rates in the intervention. Only about 10% of treated couples, if you will, received any reasonable dosage of the program. Only about 50 to 60% received any dosage. So it was hard to know exactly what this study was saying when the intervention itself was not able to be fully implemented, or at least experienced by those who were assigned to the treatment condition. So the challenge, though, is that many who were looking at this policy initiative jumped on these early findings and said, it's clear now that this policy initiative, and they probably used Wade Horn's name directly on that, I don't know, but that Wade was wrong. Ben Carney, a significant voice at UCLA who's been looking at these things, said, we've got to change direction. Clinging to ideas that don't look promising makes us look like bad scientists. Well, my response to that is it's not good science to judge the policy initiative on the first and only major study. We need a symphony of scientific data, not just a solo on drive time radio. That's not how we learn to do that. So there were other things in the works, fortunately. The next one up was the Supporting Healthy Marriage study, which again looked at thousands of married couples that were in about, 6 or 8 sites across the country. And can we, for those that have sort of made that commitment to marriage, that public commitment to forever, who experience these high divorce rates, can we strengthen those families? Here, we saw better participation rates, much better participation rates. I think it was it 70% or so received pretty strong dosages of the program. So there was a learning curve operationally of how to do that. Plus, they were probably a little bit more motivated, wanting to keep their relationship strong. Here, we saw a general pattern of small but statistically significant relationships on relationship quality. We did not see any difference between treatment and control groups in terms of family stability, in terms of divorce, although we were only looking at it over about a 2.5 year period. So there could have been some longer term effects. But also, interestingly, we did see some small child well-being impacts. So those in the treatment group were reporting small but significant improvements in some child behavior as well. The next one up was the Parents and Children Together study. A little bit smaller, but still a large scale for experimental work like this. And these included both married and unmarried couples, which I'm almost willing to say now I think might be a best practice out there, is having both married and unmarried couples together in the intervention, I think can be very helpful for both of them. So they were both married and unmarried. We again saw very good participation rates in this program. We have learned how to do this, how to reach and retain participants much more. And we saw slightly larger, I think still from a statistical standpoint, these are small impacts, but consistent, and they were a little bit bigger than in the previous study. Also, encouragingly, we did see a family stability impact, that the married couples were more likely to be together after about 2 years. Or was it 18 months? I can't see the report for those details. But you get an early on family stability effect, which I think is very important as well, as a fundamental thing that we are targeting. And again, some child well-being impacts. And there were even some economic impacts in this study, which we had not seen before. Not exactly sure why and how they were there, but we did see some of those, which was also encouraging. Also encouraging was that there were co-parenting impacts, knowing that still, even if we're making a positive impact, there's going to be a lot of family instability and a lot of breakup in these groups. And so strengthening that co-parenting relationship will also be an important outcome of this kind of work. And we saw evidence here again that these kinds of programs can help with that. Now, there were other, I've talked about 3 so far. And frankly, I've counted about 55 studies looking at these ACF-funded programs. And so there are a lot of others out there that have been done. Some of the work comes from samples that have been funded by ACF, others done independently. And there's also a pretty good pattern in that work of positive small to medium. They tend to be a little bit stronger outcomes in these studies. In addition, there are a number of quasi-experimental studies, so they were not able to fully randomize to treatment and control groups, but also found very positive effects here. And I want to point out, sometimes we say, well, it's not gold standard. We shouldn't pay attention to these studies, but the best methodologists of evaluation research, again, stress that it's a combination of many different kinds of approaches and studies to these questions that gives us the strongest answer to the overall question of whether or not it works. Believe it or not, the gold standard actually has some weaknesses. Its strength is in internal validity, but it has more of a weakness in external validity, or whether or not these are kind of generalizable findings from these studies. And so the combination of experimental and quasi-experimental studies, again, I think provides some hopeful messages about what's being accomplished. And then finally, I want to just mention, as we kind of pull together what we've learned from this body of work, is we can also start to get a sense of not just the average benefit that's out there, but as we look at more specific subgroups, who's benefiting the most? It's probably not a real surprise to this group to find that those who come to these programs more distressed, and I would put in parentheses, probably more motivated, they benefit more than the less distressed, which is important. I think we're reaching an important target audience. The more disadvantaged they are, the more likely they are to benefit from this. And where it's been asked, it's African Americans and Hispanics that seem to have benefited a little bit more from these programs than have whites. So I think there's a lot there to chew on that gives us some reason for some optimism in this early endeavor. And I also wanted to mention that when we've asked this issue of do children benefit, there are now I think now over 24 studies that have looked at this question and have found, again, these positive effects for parenting stress, and for also direct children's outcomes, children's behavioral outcomes. So we're beginning to see that, especially in those programs that include a kind of co-parenting and parenting elements to them. So let's pull this all together, and then let's hear from some other people. I do think we have shown that there is significant interest in these kinds of programs among groups who have a real need and appreciate this kind of service. I also want us to stop and dwell. I think that the body of research that's been done on this very new social policy initiative is really quite impressive. Rather than take a decade or two to kind of get our feet wet, get up the learning curve a ways, and then institute serious research. From the very beginning, we've done gold standard and a wide body of research in this area. And it may be just a historical quirk, but we have some of the very finest minds, scholar practitioner minds in this country, really intensely interested in this policy initiative. And they have really taken the horns and run with it. And the money that's been coming from the Administration for Children and Families has really energized that work. I think that's an incredible asset, that this isn't just a few people in the federal government who are curious about this. It is some very, very talented people who have been looking at these issues and working hard on these programs and evaluating these programs for 15 years now. And I think that's one thing as we move forward that we should continue to stress, is continue to support those incredible minds that are involved with this, and the learning centers that already exist, maybe to help some others who are striving to do this work well. So I do want to, it's impressive, I think, the work that's been going on here. We see small to medium impacts of this work on relationship quality. Some evidence that maybe we're even impacting family stability, though I think we have to do a better job there. And we need to be able to, I think, actually increase the marriage rates, which we've not. We've been able to increase marriage stability, but it doesn't look like so far we've been able to help couples move from a cohabiting relationship to a stable marriage relationship. Well, those are my takeaways. And just as we move forward, I'd like to suggest a couple of things here. I do think, at least from a research perspective, we need to understand, can we be more preventative in our work with couples and in family formation? Can we do educational work that helps youth and young adults make better choices about forming romantic relationships and starting families? Now, we're doing quite a bit of work in the field, but our evaluation work has not caught up with that. And so I do think we need to answer that question better. I also think that we can't assume that we know what we're doing that's saying it a little bit too strong. We know what we're doing, but we can get a lot better. And I think we need to be creative and innovative in how we go about doing that. And one concern about having a federal pot of money with all the rules that go along with that is that it may actually stifle some innovation. And so I would love to see some of those funds being used, set aside for some innovation grants. We could probably find some other ways of helping couples that may be more effective than the programmatic educational interventions that we've got going now. So I think we need to experiment a little bit more with that. Although we're reaching a significant number of people, I do think that there's many, many more we need to reach. And I think one of the innovations that's needed out there is to create different levels or tiers of intervention. One of them being much smaller, much more low dosage, more of a public health approach to this. Can we get valuable, really powerful messages out to young couples that can help them make good choices and strengthen their relationships? Because the numbers that we can get into and serve in these more intensive, programmatic kinds of ways is always going to be limited. And so I think that's one area where I would like to see some progress and some innovation. And then my final bugaboo, and I've been saying this for quite some time, I've become concerned that this policy initiative remains primarily almost exclusively at the federal level. While I deeply appreciate the support that's been there, and especially the support for that research, I would like to see this spread wider. I come from the state of Utah, and as far as I know, it is the only state that right now that is using federal funds through TANF block grants to support these kinds of relationship strengthening initiatives in the state. There are a few other states that have done this, but are not as active right now. I think Utah is the only active one. And I get worried about that. And I think there are a number of states that could be interested in looking at this more seriously with the proper incentives, perhaps from federal funds. So those are things that are on my mind as we think about moving forward with this initiative. And I want to hear from Lynn. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hawkins. That was very exciting to hear because you said so many things that I would agree. I have my timer up here because I like to talk. That I would agree. You just said everything that I would have said, so I can end this now. No, actually, I'm a different kind of thinker, and I love that Dr. Horn is here because I worked in a governor's office back when the M word came out. And I remember talking to people about the M word, and we had a Strengthening Families conference with Governor Owens, and Dr. Horn spoke. And we brought all sorts of people to the table. The room was packed. So this is something people have an interest in, whether they want to admit it or not. There is something going on in this country where we know marriage is under attack. We know that a lot of the traditional things that used to happen are no longer talked about, and sometimes our scientists will say, well, we don't do that anymore because it's not scientific. But love may not be something that is scientific, neither is commitment, but it is something that we know we have to have. But one of the things I've learned in just the year that I have been here is that we can do evidence-based, we can do scientific, we can do everything and anything, but in its silo alone, we're still not going to get that data that we want to get. I also think we're in a really exciting time in human services because we can reframe the message. And I'll give an example. I love this because my son just got married in July. Big, big deal. And so he took the Dave Ramsey, if anybody's heard of it, Financial Peace University. Another word for a marriage class, but you don't call it a marriage class, it's a financial class, because they would come home and they'd be talking together about who was the controller and who was the free spirit and how do you handle that and what do you do with that. And I thought, that's a marriage initiative around money. And as I started looking at what we've done in America, we have rolled marriage in, for those of us who know that it matters, to other things so it won't be under attack. So our kids don't say, well, why would I get married? they say, I took that class and I'm a free spirit and I want to be with this kind of person. So when we work on marriage, it's not a siloed initiative. When we work on commitment, it can't be siloed. So when we look at the Administration for Children and Families, everything is fairly siloed. And we are working to create a puzzle. And I'm a puzzle maker. It drives, I think, Clarence makes people crazy in the office because there's no one piece that is going to end the ultimate goal that we have. And so for us, the ultimate goal is not to enhance marriage. The ultimate goal is to end poverty as we know it. The ultimate goal is more children graduate from high school and go on to successful careers with livable wages so they're standing on their own 2 feet and government can get out of their business. The ultimate goal has a whole bunch of lead and lag measures, of which marriage is a significant one, of which communication and commitment and financial literacy are all pieces of the success of Americans that we are working so hard to get to. So in the puzzle pieces, we're talking about the pieces that have the M word in it. And I am super proud of what ACF has done, of where we've been, and that we've continued this work, because without it, we cannot get anywhere. I opened up a school, I will never forget this, to end poverty, and the community said to me, well, what are you going to do? And I said, we're going to eradicate poverty. But the Eradication of Poverty in Jefferson County project did not sound good, and it didn't have an acronym. So we did the Prosperity Partners Project, JPP. And in that project, we said anybody can come in. And we had about 6 families that came and joined. So it was voluntary around a Head Start, another marriage initiative, if you really get into it. But we had 13 families that ultimately started. And half of them were married, half were in committed relationships, and they all kept saying, we just can't get out of poverty. And we had to take a really good look at what are the federal rules and regulations that say you can't stay together if you want to get financial assistance. And there are some, and there still are some. What are the problems around substance abuse, around mental health, around being able to bring all the tools to a table to enhance a marriage relationship? And why is it so hard to access? We had to hire navigators to help people access the tools in order to strengthen their marriages. We didn't say we're strengthening your marriage, but we helped them do that. So how do you do that and make it easier for people to be successful? Because at the end of the day, if it's too hard to stay married, you're not going to stay married. It shouldn't be that hard. And after last week, being home for a week at Thanksgiving, I think my husband thinks it's really hard. We did cleaning. But marriage is not one of those things that people look at and they see it romantically. They don't look at it as, what can we do around marriage to eliminate poverty, to reduce substance abuse? Let's talk about a reduction in school shootings. All of those need the strengthening of the family, needs what marriage brings it, to be able to change how our systems operate. And at ACF, we're committed to that, at every single piece of it. I love the fact that we are seeing some upward movement on our marriage relationship evidence. But we need to see a lot more, and we need to reframe if we have to, so the attacks can be less strong, because the stronger the attacks to marriage, the harder it is for us to evaluate whether this is actually working or not. And we have to be able to have that good data, because I think there's no one in this room that would say you wouldn't want a healthy marriage, a strong, stable marriage that makes a difference for your families and your children. But ACF has been walking around and talking, and I know the Hill has heard this and others have heard this, but we have a new mission, and it's primary prevention. There's nothing bigger for primary prevention than healthy marriage. There's nothing bigger for primary prevention than having good communication skills. And let's talk about what we didn't have, Dr. Horn, when you started all this. We didn't have these, which is a really big deal for my kids when they're sitting next to each other, texting each other to communicate an issue. This is a marriage buster. There is a problem to this because we have not addressed the communication skills starting from yay high. And when it was, I remember middle school to high school, my kids said, can we please have a cell phone? Now it's the kids are saying at 5 and 6 years old, can I have it yet? And we have to think about that because communication, it's easier to text. I get anything out of my middle child by texting. My oldest, I can talk and text. My youngest one never stops texting. But when we're sitting in a room and I say, so how was it today? Good. Come on, guys, we have to, that's marriage right there. Thank God I don't have to text my husband to find out what's going on. But we didn't have these when we were dating. And that's what we didn't have the same communication tools when the marriage initiative started. We have to take that into consideration when we're talking to families to do primary prevention. In my school, we put these away. We do family dinners. Kids sit at the table and we have those challenge conversations and we have those success conversations. And as we watched marriages strengthen, or one person in the marriage was starting to really do well through the marriage work that we were doing, and the other one was getting more stoned because they couldn't stand what the wife was doing, or vice versa, we had to deal with bringing in that substance abuse piece. And that substance abuse piece had to do whole family. And that matters. Every single thing we do with these parents, whoever they are, low income, high income, middle income, struggling, it doesn't matter. We have to have that two-generation, that whole family concept for it to work. Because one or the other will cut each other off. And if that's more important than marriage, it won't work. If that's more important than moving out of poverty. I mean, what Ruby Payne's work, we had people who went back to be in poverty so they weren't isolated as they moved to middle class. The marriage piece makes a difference. Isolation matters in America. And all of these pieces, this is my piece of the puzzle, all of these pieces move us to the success of the marriage initiative, of commitment, of everything we do in TANF, everything we do with substance abuse, everything we do with homelessness, everything we do with mental health. But we can't wait until someone, we talk about this with fatherhood. Why are we waiting until someone has a child before we start doing a fatherhood initiative? Why aren't we talking to the kids? What are we doing about the boys? How are we strengthening boys and marriage before they get there and say, oh, whoa, I don't know what to do because I didn't have a dad? Or what are we going to do with kids 0 to 5 who are very aware of the domestic violence in their homes? What does that tell them about marriage at 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old? Why do we wait till they're 16, 17, 18 to do a marriage program? We need to infiltrate marriage into every single thing we do. Early childhood education, Head Start, K through 12, every piece of what we do has to have this marriage piece in it because it is the string, it's the magic sauce, it's the true north that will make a difference. And so that's where we're going with ACF. TANF is looking at this. Our childhood development program is, if any of you know Jerry Milner, we are talking primary prevention, strengthening families on the front end of the child welfare system. And we also have the FFPSA law that also brings prevention to the table once a child is in our system. Everything that we're talking about is about this right now. And we need to do it bigger. We need to be bold. We need to reframe if we have to. But we all have to be doing this and swimming upstream together. And I believe that if we start younger and we are intentional about our strategy, we will see changes, whether it's in the marriage numbers or in a decrease in poverty, a decrease in mental health issues, a decrease in violence. What are we measuring? And the whole picture, marriage is a piece of that. We have to move in this direction. For me, I'm on a mission. Some of you, I've heard that word a couple times this morning. I'm on a mission. It took me 16 months to get confirmed. I had a year, I've been here 1 year. We have 1 year until the next term. I am on a mission of urgency because last time I checked, not one person I talked to, especially in my school, which, by the way, 1,300 success stories, has said to me, have one more task force before you figure out a way to give me help. It doesn't work that way. Commitment, marriage, listening, loving all matter in ACF and how we serve people. So by putting people in the middle, we can change the services of human services. You guys, we have 200 years of failed human services. It is time. Well, maybe except for when Dr. Horn was there. But it's time that we take the brilliance that we all have, the neurosciences that we have, the marriage data that we have, everything we have touches the human service world, and it's time to flip it on its head. And as Jerry Milner with the Children's Bureau says, we could reduce the size of child welfare. And child welfare is significantly it's significantly impacted by this marriage initiative because abuses and neglect, everything there is impacted by this work with marriage. So as we look at these pieces and we see what's going on, picture this. We are talking about adoption and we are talking about primary prevention. Less kids coming in the system because we're strengthening families, which is the marriage initiative. We're calling it strengthening families. We could call it a marriage initiative. We are wrapping around significant money around front end. We are using Head Start as hubs. We are using everything we've got in our puzzle. We are working to get 150,000 children adopted within the next 12 to 15 months so they have permanent families. And these are the kids that have been floundering 2 to 10 years in our system. We have everybody helping us do that. And we are asking philanthropy to help us wrap around kids aging out of the system. All of this is touched by marriage, by commitment, by two-parent families. So we are asking, so if that works, we literally will have a child welfare system half its size. And we're talking about 12 to 15 months. Now, it's a big ask and a big quest, but it's a mission. And if we don't have that for these children today, if we don't believe that kids can have that diploma, that kids don't need to join gangs because their parents are healthy, then we might as well get out of the business. Because we've got to have the belief that kids deserve this. So that's a little bit about what we're doing in ACF. We've got our 2 pillars. We've got economic mobility. We've got primary prevention. Marriage is right smack in the middle of it through every single piece of what we have. And I have tons of numbers, but you said most of them, so that's why I'm winging it. But I just wanted you all to know we are definitely on this path. We definitely believe that this will work when we do it right. We can't silo anything because every human being on this earth is unique. And we have to pull the funding, we have to pull the flexibility, we have to pull every issue together because giving somebody substance abuse, which you guys, I've seen it, I've been doing this a long time, substance abuse training and assistance when they have a mental health issue and not a substance abuse issue does not work. And I want to end with 2 things. Some of you might know, have heard of the book, The Other Wes Moore. And it's written by Wes Moore. Great book. Wes, you might have seen him, sometimes he's on the morning show, but he lived in the Bronx and so did the other Wes Moore, and they both had single moms. One, the father had died, the other one, no father that they knew of. Both of them were getting into trouble. One went into boarding school, the other one went into another congregate care program. In this congregate care program, the services were expensive, very expensive. They found out Wes was beyond brilliant. He was so smart that they said, you could probably do anything you need. Well, he had dropped out of school. He was in a gang. He was so excited. They got him a job. He went back home. The other Wes Moore ran away from boarding school a couple times, just pain in the, So he goes back home, living with mom. They both are there. Mom has not been able to find a job. Both, interestingly enough, were studying to be nurses, both moms. So he says, I need to help my mom. She's 6 months behind on the rent. I need to go do something. He goes back to the gang. He makes some meth. He goes out, sells it to an undercover officer, and shoots him and is now in prison for life. The other Wes Moore is sitting in his living room, and he hears, I just ruined the book for you, but it's okay. He hears that Wes Moore is in jail, and he's Wes Moore. So he goes to the jail to talk to Wes Moore. He says, I'm Wes Moore. I want to talk to Wes Moore. And he said, why you, not me? Because our lives were parallel. It's because nobody, while he was in the congregate care facility, stepped in to deal with the dysfunction of commitment, the marriage, the family, all the other pieces. They just brought him right back into what he left. And as a child, that matters. So if we don't look at, on the other side of it, the other Wes Moore, they had moved in with grandparents, they had done some work, so there was a difference. But we as professionals need to be smarter than to take a 15, 16, 17-year-old and plop them right back into the gang area they were in with a mother that was addicted and say, make it because we found you were super smart and you have a $10 an hour job. Marriage matters in this. The commitment matters, but not after your kids are in congregate care, before that even happens. And we have to think of all these pieces. Every piece of this puzzle impacts the lives of a human being. And as the experts, as those that have studied it, we can't take one piece at a time. We have to listen to people. They do know how to get themselves out of trouble, if we just heard it, and then figure out how to integrate that, and we need our laws to let us do that. So that's what I would highly recommend we start looking at, is integrating marriage into every piece that we do, not saying we have this many marriage initiatives. We need to say everything touches on commitment and everything touches on marriage, because that's when we will see the impact. That's when we'll see what matters, and that's when we'll see human services in the United States change to be what it's meant to be. So I will end on that, and thank you for being here and listening. And I do have stats and numbers, but you can come and get those later. Thank you so much.
Oops. So I'd like to begin just by introducing our two new members of the conversation here today. To my immediate right, basically, is Wade Horn, who is now a director with Deloitte Consulting and their public sector practice. And he's working now with HHS on a variety of different projects there. Of course, prior to joining Deloitte, Wade was the former Assistant Secretary for the Administration for Children and Families at HHS, and was obviously a key architect of President George W. Bush's Healthy Marriage Initiative. And then to Wade's right is Mary Myrick, who is the CEO of Public Strategies, a 3-time recipient of Healthy Marriage and Relationship Education grants. Public Strategies is based in Oklahoma City and provides HMRE services to married and unmarried expectant and newly parenting couples through its Family Expectations program. And it is now conducting a grantee-led randomized control trial of its program. While results are still pending on its current evaluation, the program has demonstrated a consistent pattern of positive effects for couples through 2 previous rigorous federal research studies. So I've got a couple of questions just to kind of generate some conversation about this great report that Alan has given us, and also the, I think, very insightful comments from the Assistant Secretary to my immediate right. And the first thing I want to sort of raise, the first question that I want to raise is, how do you think your report, Alan, upends the kind of conventional wisdom from policymakers, from the media, and from many academics about the ways in which, from their perspective, the HMRE has been largely a failure? Like, what's the sort of bottom line?
My bottom line, I just think I've looked at the full spectrum of work that's gone on through the federal government, but also many independent researchers. And I just think as you look at that full spectrum of work, you get a very different picture of what's going on. The other thing is, I think you just have to understand that this is a bit unusual. Usually when you launch a social policy initiative, you give it some time to bake. And there's a learning curve in doing this. I once asked Wade, why he launched this at the beginning, and he had, a well thought out response. He said, I knew this was going to be controversial. And one of the ways that you deal with that is you show we're serious. We're out there. We're going to evaluate it. He knew the risks, but I think he also knew that that ACF could stay committed to the agenda. And through 3 different administrations now has stayed committed to learning about this. It took a little. I think it took a little bit of courage. Thanks, Wade.
So I've got a question kind of following up, on that point for you, Wade, and that is, why do you think policymakers and academics have kind of adopted a more critical posture towards the HMRE than they have towards other public programs like Head Start and workforce development? Like, what explains sort of their, greater willingness to jump to negative conclusions on this front from your perspective?
It's an interesting question. So when we launched this, the world did not stand up and say, hoorah, finally someone's going to take on the issue of marriage and try to do something about it. That is not the response that people had.
That's right.
The response that people had was, how dare you bring up this word? And that's why it started to be referred to as the M word. And so it was not just controversial, it was denigrated from the start. And I think that there were people who were rooting for failure, looking for failure. And so when the first studies came out and they showed that they were not as robust positive findings that any of us would have wanted, they grabbed hold on that. So let me give a little perspective. ACF spends $52 billion a year. The Healthy Marriage Initiative is not 49 billion of it. It's not 2 billion of it.
That's right.
It's 75 million of $52 billion. So it's not as though, as some critics said, my goodness, what's happened is they've completely shifted everything in the direction of healthy marriage. There's still lots of other things that go on at ACF that are not part of that $75 million. But more than that, we had some headwinds we were going after. The late Peter Rossi, one of the world's foremost evaluating experts, had promulgated some iron laws about evaluation, and I just want to read 3 of them to you. The first, the iron law of evaluation is the expected value of any net impact assessment of any large-scale social program is 0. So you just sort of, that's, if you start out with a large social program, the most likely outcome is it has 0 impact. The stainless steel law of evaluation says the better designed the impact assessment of a social program is, the more likely the resulting estimate of net impact will be 0. And most people will say that this was a pretty well-designed social experiment as well. And then the brass law of evaluation says the more social programs are designed to change individuals, the more likely the net impact of the program will be 0. So,
Strike 3.
it's kind of like that. The headwind against evaluation, it was a bit risky for us to say, we're going to commit a lot of money to see if this works. What I didn't anticipate, to be honest with you, was the reaction that this is a light switch. And that if the initial evaluation was not wonderful, wasn't perfect, we would turn the light switch off, money would stop flowing, and we would never mention the word marriage again for the rest of eternity, for the rest of time. I thought that it would be more like, hey, this is a start. Let's learn something from it. Let's make it better. In every other social program I can think of, that's what we did.
That's right.
We do that in Head Start. The first evaluations of Head Start were not very promising. They were not very positive. We didn't say, that's it, we give up. We're not going to help the poor kids anymore, succeed in their education. We said, let's try to make it better. Let's experiment with making it better. The early evaluations of welfare to work programs didn't have much impact. We didn't say, that's it, we're done, we're not going to do that ever again. We said, let's use that information to make it better.
That's right.
It's interesting to me that this is one area, and the only area I can think of where the response to an initial evaluation was, let's not do this anymore.
Mary, in terms of just following up on Wade's comments now, when you look at the evaluation research that's been done to date, what you see is that your work with your colleagues in Oklahoma tends to get positive marks in that research, often is an outlier in some ways in terms of the positive outcomes. If you had to kind of give us sort of maybe 3 lessons that you think you have learned in terms of providing programmatic help to couples that would help to account for your distinctive record of success, what would those kind of 3 lessons be? In other words, why have you guys had more success than many other programs that have been kind of working in this space?
So I think the first thing is just time. I think you mentioned,
Right.
that the study happened at the beginning of the Federal Marriage Initiative. Oklahoma had already been in this mindset of thinking about marriage before it got engaged in the first federal study. So we had actually been working in this field, learning, preparing staff, getting staff ready for a couple of years before the very first study happened. So we were in a different place than all the other programs that were in the Building Strong Families evaluation, and we were the only site that had impacts. And I think it was in part because we were clear about having the time to get ready. We also had a clear purpose. So we were created out of this idea of healthy marriage, strengthening families. And so because we had that orientation, we didn't have to restructure our program to accommodate for it. So from the very beginning, this was our job, this was our goal, and we didn't have to think back about, well, if we have this home visiting program and it's only with moms, how do we engage dads? From the very beginning, we had this mindset of mom and dad both were equally important to the family. So I think that mattered. And then we had a really strong commitment to performance. So we had, I think in Building Strong Families, the only performance-based contract. We actually got our reimbursement based on, we actually enrolled the sample we were supposed to enroll. We had participation goals. And so from the beginning, we said it's going to matter that people get, I think we had the largest dose by far in that program. We've always had sort of a dose mindset. How can we get people the most of something? And so I think we did deliver a large dose to a large number of people, and then people were able to measure the impacts from that.
And just to follow up, I think it's clearly the case, just judging from Alan's report, that this issue of dosage is pretty central. It's trying to get people not just exposed to sort of one class or one message, but to kind of come back and to have a longer standing relationship with the program is one key element of success, as your comments just indicated. And so if you're thinking about kind of your own experience, what is your reflection on how you have succeeded in terms of increasing the dosage, and what you would kind of sort of the kind of wisdom you would give to other programs that are trying to increase that that contact, that dosage with your clients?
So I think it's not one thing; it's lots of things. People come for lots of reasons. They come back for lots of reasons. So some people come because we have financial incentives to participate. Some say, well, I'd come back even without those. Well, that's just a theory we've never tested. So, we're competing with, like everybody else, for people's time.
Right.
And, if you average out our incentives, it's less than minimum wage for people to come invest in their families. So we paid a lot of attention to the quality of the service. This is actually worth it to come back. I'm actually getting something from it. So the people who deliver our services are not the person who had 25% of their time available, but they're people who are actually skilled at doing this work. We paid a lot of attention to culture of the building and the place. And Sarah Halper-Meekum's work on social poverty came out of her study of the environment at family expectations, and what happens there is that people actually find social support that they believe is critical to their success.
So Lynn, I wanted just to kind of follow up on your comments this morning and ask you if there are any particular kinds of initiatives that are on your radar screen. You've talked about the ways in which you're threading marriage and family-related topics through a variety of different programmatic work at ACF, but is there are there any particular newer things that are on your radar screen you'd like to give us a preview of, or some other kind of new directions that you're thinking about moving in that would be interesting for our conversation here this morning?
I think I mentioned some, but the biggest piece for us is moving things upstream down to the early childhood piece, and then roping everything together. Not starting after the damage has happened, but starting while people are looking at ways to change their lives. And it's very difficult for a child who was raised in a violent family to all of a sudden turn 18 and know that life can be different. I think most of us that have been married for a long time, we had role models that were also married for a long time. And we want to give that to families and children, whether it be through what their parents did or through observation of what others have done and in discussions. So we are rolling a lot together. The primary prevention is critical, and economic mobility also includes all of this same work.
Okay. So we now have time for some questions from the audience. We've had some great interventions, and I welcome any questions that you all might have for our panelists here today. Start, I guess, with Bill over on the left.
Those that have the report, the biggest finding. I'm Bill Coffin. I used to be involved with this work for 9 years at ACF, so it was my privilege. And the finding on the right-hand column on page 8 is one of the best findings in social programs, and that is from Oklahoma. And it says that there was a 20% increase in the number of couples that were still together after 3 years, which means that every class that Oklahoma ran for years, there was somebody, a couple in that class that was still together at the 3-year mark that would not have been together had they not taken that class. And that matters to Johnny, or Susie, or Harry.
Thanks for your presentation. So 2 brief questions. One, to Alan's point, why don't you think states have been stepping up on this issue? And then a second question, more broadly, a critique that you might hear of federal policy initiatives when they try and use local bodies and institutions is that they end up attaching so many strings to the grants that it becomes kind of just bureaucratic red tape. How have you all avoided that problem and actually gotten local community buy-in?
Lynn could answer this much better than I'm just speculating. I think it's just a kind of historical thing. This began as a federal initiative, and yes, there were some financial mechanisms that could incent states to do that, but I think states were willing to kind of hold back and see what happened. And I don't know exactly why there hasn't been more interest in doing this. I'll bet Lynn could speculate better about that.
I think that it's the M word. It's the marriage being related to faith and the separation of church and state and all of those pieces as an excuse, why not a reason to. And so I do think there's that. When I asked questions of states 10 years ago and about how they use their TANF, which is to be used for this, they have every other reason and every other thing that they're using TANF on. And so we are looking at that and really trying to work with states on knowing that TANF does have 4 purposes, not 50. But I had to say that because Clarence was saying, and you're going to say this. And then on cutting the red tape, very, very important to us. I have a new, I wish it was a law, it's called the CTC, Cut the Crap. And we have got to get out of that business. We cannot, whether it's for the person we serve, they should not have to go to 10 different places to get their services. For the staff that are having to juggle everything, every rule and reg, compliance is not an outcome. And we require compliance to an awful lot of things before we get to an outcome. And so this administration is very serious about eliminating rules and regulations. So we have piles of rules and regulations we are looking at. In fact, we had Deloitte come in and show us some IT efforts that we can use to find unnecessary rules and regulations. And we are determined to get out of the way of local governments, state governments, nonprofits, faith groups, because our rules and regulations sometimes is only that. And we are not getting to the heart of what the human being wants. So we are working hard on that. Clarence is working on it. And we intend to CTC. Let's get out of this business of making life difficult because we're the feds. But we are finding, I will have to give us some credit, our rules and regulations are much less than what states add on after they get our funding, and then they want it done a certain way, so they add on either through state plans and or legislative initiatives. So we found that there's more red tape that come from the states, and they will tell me, well, we thought that's what you wanted. So we're trying to undo that thinking, and we're trying to simplify, best outcomes come from the most simple programs because they can be targeted toward the need. So we are doing that, we're taking it serious, but we have to remind people, we're not here to measure compliance and play gotcha. We're here to get to outcomes and what can we do to serve you to get there.
There was a second part to that question that we didn't get to, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So could I just add one thing to that? So within the context of the Healthy Marriage Initiative, when you think about doing a national multi-site evaluation, you can't do that without some standardization across the evaluation sites. So there was, by definition, some constriction of what it is that individual sites could do, because if you're going to combine those samples across multi-sites, they can't be doing completely different things. I sometimes wonder whether I made a mistake in going too quickly to multi-site national evaluations as opposed to single-site evaluations of lots of different ideas. And again, I think it was related to this fact, I did not anticipate that anybody would think, I mean, we tried a single model, which was short-term marriage education for couples, one model for unmarried couples, another for married couples. And that's not the universe of possible things you could do to strengthen marriage through public policy. So I just said, okay, we're going to try these two models, see if they work. If they don't work, we'll try something else. Had I thought that the reaction would have been, and not just from people sort of on the more left side of the equation, a lot of people on the right side of the political equation have also taken up the mantle of this didn't work and let's not do this anymore. I think if I'd anticipated that, I would have provided more flexibility across a variety of sites and program models and tried to do smaller evaluations as opposed to a large-scale multi-site evaluation out of the chute. And so I think some of the constriction that happens in multi-site evaluations is because you have to do that.
Brett, I would want to jump in for Oklahoma too, because I'm in a state that has for 20 years invested in this. And they've invested in it in a lot of ways, trained thousands of people. And so whether there's still government funding for it or not on any given day, there's capacity across our state and people who think differently because that work has gone on. So I think the reason Oklahoma has continued to invest in it is because it meets a need that Oklahoma has. And I think the more we can align what the grants are doing and the federal initiative is doing to meet the needs that states have, the better. I think the other reason why states don't engage in this is that just generally human service systems really aren't about couples.
Yeah.
They're about individuals.
That's right.
Yep.
And so they actually haven't thought about, I remember us having this really great conversation about what would it look like if you had an employment program where you actually engage this other person at home in the employment discussion. Those are the kind of things that I think the structure of government actually doesn't make way for this, and so people need some help figuring out how to have it meet their needs.
And I can say I'm in one of the reddest states that exist, and there's a strong, as you said, Wade, there's a strong countercurrent among very conservative, libertarian conservatives who you can talk to them about, this is about getting government out of the lives of families, and they can't hear it.
Yeah.
And so there are those real challenges out there, I think, to getting buy-in to this work.
Lawrence?
This is for Alan, Mary, and Wade. So we are about to embark upon the fourth cohort of healthy marriage grantees. What advice would you give us for thinking how we can strengthen this next 5-year cohort that's about to embark upon this?
My suggestions are in the report, and I'm going to cede my time to Mary because I know her head is in this day, every day. So I want to hear what Mary says here.
I think from the beginning, this initiative at ACF has had a really strong commitment to evidence, and it's really quite encouraging to read Alan's report to hear about these 55 studies. And I know there's some frustration in the field about we took evaluations seriously. And so there's a program in Alabama that's had Random assignment, positive impacts on youth programs. There's a program in Kentucky, random assignment, positive impacts on individuals. Family expectations, Oklahoma, multiple times, family impacts on couples. And so I think trying to think through, if you look at those programs, there's some things that they have in common. They've been around for a while. And I think we saw really a nice model in the pregnancy prevention work where, you know, people who had done this work, and I think we see this at the Department of Labor, people who have done this work for a while, who are demonstrating good work, they do more, right? Like these are learning centers, and you actually build up the capacity, continue to build the capacity for the people who are doing good work. At the same time, you always want to have innovation grants, and those grants are usually smaller. They're a way to start in this field because you want to bring new people in. But we've learned a lot about what works and really prioritizing funding to the things and the places that are doing good work matters. I also think the local evaluation initiative this last time was a big success.
Yeah.
There were evaluations that didn't work, and just like there are grants that don't work out so well. But we're going to see a whole lot, I think, kind of an early preview. I think we'll have impacts in our Healthy Marriage program in Oklahoma. I think we'll have impacts in our Responsible Fatherhood program in Oklahoma. So I think we are going to know that because of these local evaluations. And so I'd really like to see there be an opportunity for the people in the field who've been doing this work, who get up every single day thinking about how to do it better, stay involved and engaged in the initiative.
Yeah.
So two things. One, have room for a lot of smaller grants that get spread out to a larger number of community-based organizations, because I think the field is so new that will help to spur innovation. And then as you start to collect data and information from those wide variety of programs, you can start to see, got to surmise which kinds of models are the most effective. And for the next piece, I'm going to tell a story. I'm a clinical child psychologist, and when I went to graduate school, I was taught that to be a good parent, you should never tell a child what to do. So one evening, my little 3-year-old child, I was trying to help her discover it would be a good idea to pick up her toys before she went to bed. So I tried to get her to do that without telling her what to do, and finally she, in frustration, put her hands on her hips and she said, "Daddy, if you want me to do something, just tell me and I'll do it." And I said, "Pick up your toys." She said, "Fine," and she picked up her toys. So if we want people to see this as about being about marriage, we should not be afraid or have them be afraid to use the word. If what we really want is something called stable, healthy marriages, well, I'm all for, good relationship skills and all of that, but if this little bit of money, 75 million out of 52 billion, is about helping people form and sustain healthy marriages, we ought to emphasize that in the grant making so that people understand, oh, the thing you want is this, not all this other stuff. All that stuff's great, and you can do that as well, but this is at its core, and we shouldn't be afraid to tell people that.
Got one more question here. It's front here.
Hey guys, I'm Eric Cockling with the Georgia Center for Opportunity. Thank you all for your work. I've followed all of you at some level for years, so thank you for all that you're doing on this issue. One thing that I'm thinking about, and I just wonder what you think about this, is the question of headwinds. Wade, you brought this up about the headwinds that the programs have faced and why they haven't been as successful as we would like for them to be. Where do you place things like the welfare cliff, marriage penalties that are built into the welfare system in terms of just a headwind that maybe is above others, because we're asking people to essentially act against their economic self-interest in what we're asking them to do here?
So I think you could speak to that since you've just written a paper on marriage penalties.
I've got a report under review at HHS that is addressing this issue, and there's certainly evidence that there's a modest negative impact associated with a lot of different marriage penalties on people's likelihood of being married, especially kind of the working class segment now. Because thresholds have risen for a lot of different programs, what we're seeing now is that sort of that marriage penalty is more likely to bite among the working class rather than the poorest of the poor, for whom if they get married, their income is low enough that they're still going to get access to whatever program we're talking about. Whereas working class Americans are more likely to face a penalty, especially when it comes to, from our work, Medicaid. And so if we're thinking about trying to make marriage more accessible, obviously, to lower income families, I think one thing to think about is how do we kind of minimize or eliminate those penalties that can follow in the wake of getting married for things like Medicaid or for child care assistance or other kinds of programs that are means tested.
So I'll answer it. Everything you say is exactly correct. It is expensive to get rid of marriage penalties, but we ought to do it just out of a sense of fairness. But the much bigger headwind, in my view, is the popular culture.
Yeah.
And to get the popular culture likes to say it's just a piece of paper, it doesn't matter. Cohabitation is the equivalent of marriage. As long as two people love each other, it's fine. And it's all nonsense, of course, in terms of what all the empirical evidence says. Now, okay, if someone's watching this, no cohabiting, they're going to say, oh my gosh, he's back in Ozzie and Harriet land. And well, I'm not saying that we should outlaw cohabitation or you just stigmatize people cohabiting, but we ought to tell people the truth.
That's right.
And that's all. That's all I ask the popular culture to do, is to tell people the truth. That if you want to provide a mom and a dad for a lifetime of your children, cohabitation is one route, but is not as sure a route as marriage is. And marriage is not a sure route. There's certainly lots of marriages that end in divorce, and a lot of them should end in divorce. But it's a better route. It's a much more likely route to providing that kind of stability over the child's lifetime. So I'll trade off fixing the marriage penalty if you'll let me fix the culture, and because I think that will have a much more powerful impact on people's lives and the choices they make.
Please join me in thanking our panel for today.
Thank you.